Lamar Jackson trade rumors are back again, and this time the conversation feels very different inside Baltimore. The Ravens want stability at quarterback, but reports now suggest Jackson is comfortable waiting while the entire quarterback market keeps climbing around him. Headline 1. Lamar Jackson may delay extension talks until 2027. Headline 2. Reports suggest the Ravens are concerned about future salary cap pressure. Headline 3. Some analysts believe a trade request could eventually become possible. Headline 4. Jackson's no franchise tag clause gives him major leverage in future negotiations. The important part here is not just the money. It is the timing. According to reports discussed by Chris Canty and Jeremy Fowler, Jackson appears comfortable allowing the quarterback market to continue rising before making a final decision on another extension. That changes the dynamic completely for Baltimore, because every major quarterback contract now resets expectations around the league. When Jackson signed his 5-year deal worth $260 million in 2023, it was viewed as a landmark agreement. At the time, the Ravens finally secured their franchise quarterback after tense negotiations and even a previous trade request from Jackson himself. For a while, it looked like both sides had moved beyond that difficult chapter. Now the situation feels more complicated again. The Ravens have reportedly restructured Jackson's contract multiple times in order to create salary cap flexibility. Most recently, part of his salary was converted into a bonus to reduce his 2026 cap hit. In the short term, that helps the organization remain competitive around him. In the long term, though, it pushes major financial pressure into future seasons. That is why the projected 2027 cap hit matters so much. An $84 million cap hit for one player would dramatically limit what Baltimore could do across the rest of the roster. Teams can survive large quarterback contracts when they consistently draft well, but eventually every front office reaches difficult decisions. Veterans leave. Depth disappears. Windows close faster than expected. That is the balancing act facing the Ravens right now. On one side, they have one of the most talented quarterbacks in football. On the other side, they have to protect the long-term health of the roster around him. And when a quarterback understands his leverage, negotiations rarely become easier. Jackson's leverage may actually be stronger today than it was during his last contract standoff. One reason is the market itself. Dak Prescott reportedly reached $60 million annually, while several other quarterbacks have continued pushing average yearly salaries higher. Jackson currently sits below some of those names despite already winning 2 MVP awards and consistently carrying Baltimore's offense through different roster transitions. That naturally creates a question from Jackson's perspective. If the market keeps climbing, why rush into another agreement right now? From the Ravens' perspective, though, waiting creates danger. Every new quarterback contract increases the price of doing business. If Baltimore waits too long, Jackson's next deal could become even larger than what ownership already expects. That explains why the organization reportedly wants progress sooner rather than later. Then there is the no franchise tag clause. That detail may become one of the most important parts of this entire story. Once Jackson reaches free agency in 2028, Baltimore reportedly cannot simply use the franchise tag to keep him for another season. That means the Ravens eventually face only 3 realistic outcomes: agree to a long-term extension, consider a trade, or risk losing him outright. That gives Jackson patience. Most star quarterbacks understand that teams usually blink first because elite quarterbacks are incredibly difficult to replace. Baltimore knows exactly how dangerous life without Jackson could become. His dual-threat ability shapes the entire identity of the offense, forces defenses into uncomfortable decisions, and creates opportunities that few quarterbacks in football can replicate. At the same time, the criticism surrounding Jackson has not disappeared. Despite all the individual success, playoff questions still follow him. He has not yet delivered a Super Bowl appearance for Baltimore, and fair or unfair, quarterbacks at his level are ultimately judged by championships. The Ravens have remained competitive, but close losses in big moments continue fueling debate about whether this current version of the roster can truly finish the job. That pressure affects negotiations too. Front offices never evaluate contracts in a vacuum. They look at playoff results, roster construction, future flexibility, and long-term risk all at once. Jackson's camp likely sees a two-time MVP quarterback who deserves another massive commitment. The Ravens likely see a franchise cornerstone whose contract could eventually reshape the entire structure of the roster. Those are not identical viewpoints. Another interesting layer here is Jackson continuing to operate without a traditional agent. Some people assume that automatically weakens a player's position, but in this situation it may actually simplify his priorities. Jackson has shown before that he is willing to stay patient, trust his own judgment, and wait for terms he believes reflect his value. That patience could become uncomfortable for Baltimore. Jason La Canfora's report about a potential trade demand obviously remains speculative at this stage, and there has been no public confirmation from Jackson suggesting he wants out. Still, the fact that respected analysts are openly discussing that possibility tells you how much tension could develop if negotiations stall closer to training camp. And that is the key timeline to watch. If the offseason continues without meaningful progress, every public appearance and every press conference will create more questions. Eventually, distractions grow louder. Fans pick sides. National debate shows amplify every rumor. Suddenly, a contract negotiation becomes the dominant storyline surrounding an entire franchise. Baltimore would prefer to avoid that scenario completely. The Ravens still believe they can compete for a championship with Jackson leading the offense. Walking away from a quarterback of his caliber is not a decision organizations make lightly. But the NFL has also become a league where financial flexibility matters almost as much as star power. That is why this story feels bigger than a normal contract negotiation. It is really about how modern franchises manage elite quarterbacks in an exploding market. Jackson understands his value. The Ravens understand his importance. The challenge is finding a number and a structure that protects both sides before the pressure surrounding the situation becomes impossible to ignore. There is also the coaching factor hanging quietly over this entire discussion. Reports suggest Baltimore believes changes around the team could help maximize the next phase of Jackson's career. But long-term planning becomes difficult when the quarterback situation remains unresolved. Stability matters for coaching staffs, offensive systems, and future roster decisions. If the Ravens truly expect Jackson to remain the centerpiece of the franchise for another decade, they likely want clarity sooner rather than later. From Jackson's side, though, there may be no reason to rush. Quarterback contracts continue rising almost every offseason, and history shows that patience often rewards elite players financially. Waiting also allows him to evaluate the direction of the franchise, the competitiveness of the roster, and the future vision of the organization before committing again. None of that guarantees a separation is coming, but it does explain why this negotiation feels more delicate than many expected only a year ago. For now, both sides publicly appear calm, and there is still plenty of time before this becomes a genuine crisis. But the closer Baltimore moves toward another expensive quarterback decision, the more every contract detail, roster move, and playoff expectation will matter. That is exactly why league insiders continue watching the situation so closely heading into the upcoming season for the Ravens. So here is the question for Ravens fans. If you were running Baltimore, would you commit another record-setting contract to Lamar Jackson right now? Or would you seriously consider alternative options before the market climbs even higher?